Welcome back to this week's episode of Friends of Kayla. I have Adela Cojab here. Adela, it's so great to see you in person.
Thank you. Great to see you in person.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I had no idea you were Mexican, and I was just in Mexico City this weekend. So it's like very fun timing that we're having this conversation right after getting back from this trip. I was so stunned to see the closeness, the tight-knit community that the Jewish community there is, and it's really beautiful. And I feel like as an American Jew, someone that grew up in the Northeast, like in Massachusetts, very like Ashkenazi family. Like I was never exposed to like Latin Jews at all. So it was surprising to me, but very beautiful to see like the culture there.
Yeah, people don't think that Latin Jews exist, but we're out there, and we're an amazing community. Actually, I've met a lot of Jewish communities that when I tell them I'm Mexican, say, "Wow, like my community's actually gone to Mexico to study the structure of your Jewish community." Because one thing that Mexican Jews have that I think very few communities have is we have a central committee. So the Ashkenazi Jews, Turkish Jews, Moroccan Jews, Syrian, it doesn't matter. They all send a representative to the central committee, and the central committee could decree different things to the whole community to make sure that it's always strong. So for example, the shuls were dying, right? Like no one was going to shul. The shuls needed more money. They can't raise dues because no one wants to go. So the central committee said every chuppah must be in a synagogue. So suddenly every Thursday night, every Sunday night, there's weddings at the synagogues, and that created revenue. But then they realized that, people were making blowout weddings and it was creating a lot of inequality. So they said, you know what? We make 3 packages of flowers. They all cost the same. The only thing that changes are the colors, and they're beautiful, by the way. And you can do your wedding reception however you want. You can fly people to a private island, but inside of the synagogue, everyone's equal. And I think that that's something really special that Mexican Jews have, that the Central Committee looks out for the community and makes sure that we're always strong, number one, and number two, that we're always united.
Yeah, I've never heard of having a central committee like that. I don't know of any other Jewish community that has that. Do you know of
No.
one?
I think Panama has something similar, and I think Brazil might too, but really I think it's a Latin thing.
There's just so much that a lot of us diaspora Jews don't know about diaspora Jews, which is so crazy to me as someone that grew up just like super Ashkenaz. I just had no insight into what any other community looked like, let alone like the Sephardic community. And being in Miami, I've been surrounded by such a diverse population of people, and it's been really fun to see. And being in Mexico City too, I felt very safe there to be Jewish. Like I had my Megan David out, my chai necklace, whereas in other places I would not feel as safe to do that. So that was also really, really nice to be feeling that way. Yeah.
I'm so happy you enjoyed it. It makes me really happy when people go to Mexico and really experience the culture for what it is in the community. And at least for me, I find whatever anti-Semitism does exist in Mexico, it usually comes from misinformation about the Jewish religion, because a lot of people have never met a Jew, as opposed to anti-Zionism, which we see here in the States.
Right. I was going to say, I think I saw one in the area that I was staying in. I saw maybe like one Palestinian flag as a sticker on someone's door, but that was the only thing I saw.
And I can assure you, that's probably an American transplant.
Okay. Interesting. It may not be like a local native
They
Mexican.
don't care.
Yeah. I mean, I could see, they probably have no idea what my chai necklace is when I'm walking around, right?
If you explain it to them, they'd be like, oh, wow, a Jew. Never met one.
You're so unique. Yeah. And actually we went to an Israeli spot, Balagan,
Yeah, Balagan,
which I'm
Balagan.
sure like people don't even know that that's an Israeli or like a Hebrew word, right? They're just like going to this cool bar
Yeah.
and having Mediterranean food. So it was just, it was interesting. It was fun to see like the Jewish flair of Mexico City. So highly recommend for people to go visit, because there was, yeah, amazing Jewish culture. Who would have ever thought? But so what does it mean to you to be a Mexican Jew? And is that where you identify at your core?
Well, it's interesting because my family's from Syria and Lebanon, and when they left, they went wherever they could go. So a lot of them ended up in Mexico, a lot in Brazil, some in Monaco, some in London, some in Montreal, and we spread across the world. And I was born in Mexico, and growing up, I always visited my cousins in Brazil or my cousins in London, and I always thought I was very international. And then I moved to Deal, New Jersey, and if you know anything about Syrian Jews, it's like the Syrian Jewish Hamptons almost. And suddenly, everyone was a Syrian Jew, but I was Mexican, right? So that made me different. I was the Mexican Jew. And I think I really leaned into it growing up. Like I ran for student government president in middle school, and my whole campaign was Dora themed, which of course, like now looking back, I don't really think that was the best, but everyone knew me as the Mexican, so I leaned into it. I had taco parties. I did Cinco de Mayo, even though it's not actually Mexican Independence Day. People are like, what are we doing for Cinco? And I'm like, I guess it falls on me. So I really took on that Mexican identity. But then weirdly enough, when I got to college, I'm really one of the only Syrian Jews I meet. So suddenly my Syrian Jewish identity became more important than my Mexican Jewish identity, because no one knew Middle Eastern Jews existed. And in college campuses, that was kind of the conflict I was seeing. Middle East versus Israel but I'm both.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic. And what made you want to go to school in New York for
Well,
college?
it's funny you ask. When I was maybe in fourth grade, someone gave me a pamphlet that said NYU, the school for leaders. And I had no idea what that meant, but I said, I'm going to go to NYU and be a leader. So I signed up for NYU pre college classes and I started taking summer courses there. And then my brother went to NYU and I went to visit him and I became a pre college ambassador for NYU. I became Miss NYU at my school. So by the time I was applying to colleges, I knew I was going to NYU. And when my advisor said, well, what if you don't get in? I said, I'll go to Israel for the year, volunteer, and then I'll come back and apply again. And I really had no backup plan other than NYU. And now it's funny looking back after everything that happened at NYU, and I end up suing the school and changing a law on a national level. I really loved NYU. Like when I got there, I joined student government. I bled violet for NYU, and I felt like I was betrayed by the school that I loved so much.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that. I've seen your, Title VI case, and it's incredible that you did that at such a young age, first of all. So I give you so much credit for doing so. But when I was, doing my research on you before and listening to some things in podcasts you've done in the past, something really resonated with me because you talked about how you were like so Jewish growing up, went to Jewish school and like were more, would you say that you grew up a bit more traditional? Yeah. So you grew up traditional, but then you were like, I want to go to NYU and experience something different and be around other people, not just Jews,
I
right?
wanted to branch out. I really wanted to branch out. I said Judaism's great and it's part of who I am, but I don't want to be the Jewish girl in college. Like that's when I started leaning more into my Syrian identity, which I never really considered an identity I had because I was always around Syrian Jews. I started leaning more into my Mexican identity. And when I got to college, I really I told you, like I had a radio show, I had a student government, and I didn't want to be the Jewish girl, but end of the day, like there's a concept of hineni, which means here I am in Hebrew, and it's about stepping up when the time comes. And my time at college was a hineni moment. It was as much as I might not want to do this, I have to protect my community.
Yeah. Do you feel like you attending MIU was a product of assimilation? Were you kind of just over being the Jew?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think growing up in a Syrian Jewish community where everyone's the same, I really needed to get out. I think of my grade of 27, 28 girls, maybe only 8 of us went to college out of state. And of that, I think only 5 of us dormed. So, and maybe the numbers are even less, but most of my friends really, the ones who did go to school, they went locally, they still lived at their parents' house, or they didn't go to school altogether. And I really wanted to step out of that. And I think everyone knew that, in my high school, my principal knew that, my teachers knew that. They all knew Adela was going to go to NYU and take New York by storm.
Yeah, and you certainly did that. Talk about taking it by storm. So what kind of influenced, or I guess what did your family think? Like you grew up in like this household that was a bit more traditional. Sounds like no one from your community really branched out. So was that something your parents were encouraging you to do?
Yes, my mom absolutely. So my parents got divorced when I was about 12. And my mom, she was your typical Syrian Jewish woman in Mexico. She met the right guy from the right family and they got married when she was straight out of high school, 18, and they had 2 kids and then they moved to the States and they had 2 more kids. And throughout all that background, her and my dad had a really bad marriage. And my mom decided finally to get out of it. And my dad wanted to move back to Mexico. My mom said no. She said, I'm going to stay here and raise my kids in America because she wanted us to have opportunities that she would have never had. Now, my mom's a genius. She speaks 6 languages. When she did decide to go back to college, I remember we went to her graduation as her kids and we were so excited and everyone kept congratulating her. And we're like, yeah, congrats to you too. And they're like, no, but really to you. And my mom didn't understand until she realized afterwards when we opened the pamphlet that she got #1 in the real estate program and she had a different colored tassel because of it. So it's one of those things that my mom realized that if you were a woman with brains, you wouldn't have opportunity if you grew up in communities like the one I did, either in Deal or in Mexico. So my mom told me from when I was 12 that I should go to college, get an education, and, still prioritize dating and all that. But she said, build something for yourself, not even something to fall back on, but just so you can do it. And my mom went back to college with 4 kids. No job experience, no education, nothing, and no visa, and really built herself up from scratch again in Jersey. So I learned from her. And I also learned from my grandma, Leah Shalom, who passed. She also got married at 16, had 5 kids, as they do, but she decided to go back to take classes after she was in her mid-30s. And there was a neo-Nazi professor, and she started making a lot of noise about it, but ultimately It was the 80s in Mexico, and she was a Syrian Jewish woman. So she kind of took it as far as she could until she couldn't. So I always say that I'm continuing that in an era where women do have opportunity, even if it means that my community might not see it in the same way. This time period does allow it. And now the Syrian community is amazing. Now, actually, there's an organization called Propel that I work with a lot that has mentorship programs for, let's say a woman actually went and studied nursing, and now there's a girl in high school who wants to go into nursing. We have one Syrian Jewish woman who studied nursing, so we connect them and we're like, hey, she did nursing, you talk to them. So I'm a lawyer, and they connect me all the time to students who are girls who want to be lawyers and say, okay, well, what does that mean? What classes do I need to take undergrad? How do I apply to law schools? How's it different? What's game theory? And suddenly you walk them through in this mentorship program, and it really becomes like it takes a village, and we become that village.
That's incredible that you're like able to give back to your people in that way as well. So when it comes to like NYU and your experience, I want to hear more about like your story and what led to this like case that you ultimately ended up filing. So you were at NYU, you're like meeting all these new people. Like what was the biggest like culture shock to you when you started at NYU?
Well, I mean, everything was so new to me. Like I went from like Syrian Jewish Deal, New Jersey, to suddenly living in Manhattan, and I was living with people who were not like me because I did random rooming. Like it was completely different, and I loved it. But I think for me, again, the culture shock was that no one had ever met a Syrian Jew. I didn't really know Ashkenazi Jews growing up because we only had like 4 or 5 of them in my grade. So I was like, oh, wow, like I'm a minority here. Like I just didn't understand that until I got to college. And my first 2 years really were so wonderful. Like they were great. My first 2 years, I branched out of everything. I was on student government. I was happy with my friends there.
But you weren't involved in Jewish life, right?
No, I was still somewhat involved. I joined a group called Realize Israel, which is the Israel advocacy group, and I was vice president. I don't know how to just be involved. I had to be super involved. But it was one of the many things I did. Like my weekly planning was my radio show. You know what I mean? Like I had a lot of things that were going for me, and the Israel and Judaism part were just one part of that. And then suddenly my junior year, everything changed and everything turned to Israel, Palestine. And suddenly it didn't matter that I was Syrian and Mexican and a woman. I was just a Zionist. And all those spaces I was welcomed in before suddenly turned against me. And I found myself feeling very alone and looking for the friendships that I took for granted, saying, oh, I'm always going to have the Jewish community. I needed that Jewish community. And I'm so glad I did have it, because when everyone else turned, they were the people I turned to.
Isn't that so interesting? It takes like us moving away from like our core roots to really have an experience like this where we're immediately shoved back to those initial roots that we tried to push so far away. I think that's like a common experience amongst many of us diaspora Jews in particular. So you're certainly not alone in that. But I think, what's interesting about your story is that this was so unexpected for you. And like this was a place that you were striving to go to school for your whole life. And being in New York, it's such a Jewish city, you would never think something like this would happen. Yet New York City is home to some of the most anti-Semitic universities in this country. So what exactly happened? And what year was it that you actually filed the Title VI case?
So all this was happening in 2018, and I filed in 2019. And I'll tell you why it took me about a year to file. But it started with BDS, which you see across college campuses. But the difference is that NYU actually has a campus in Tel Aviv. So for us, it's not just a hypothetical boycott Israel. It became, shut down the Tel Aviv campus, or, shut down Tel Aviv professors. And the resolution really had teeth to it when other resolutions didn't. And when I saw the resolution come up, I started talking to the school about it, and they said, well, what do you want us to do about it? And I said, shut it down. And they said, we can't shut down a student government resolution. It's going to have to just make its way through the university senate until it's shut down by the professors and the faculty, which I had a feeling it wouldn't. And over a span of 3 months, we had the resolution for BDS on student government. Then we had a pledge for BDS by 70 professors against Israeli academics. And then we had 53 clubs pledging to boycott any group that associates with Israel, meaning every Jewish group.
And what was I'm just trying to think back to 2018, because I guess at that time, I hadn't even gone on Birthright, right? So I wasn't feeling so connected to my Zionism and my Jewish identity as a whole. But what was happening during that year?
It's funny you ask. I don't know if you remember the 2018 migrant crisis in Africa. In Africa in 2018, you had African migrants that were entering countries in Europe by the hordes. Like it was hundreds of thousands of people who were exiting Nigeria and all these countries, trying to enter France, trying to enter the UK, and of course also entering Greece and Israel. And every country figured out how to deal with it on their own. Some countries just sent them back. Some countries send them to a third party country. Israel cannot absorb 400,000 people. It just can't. It's a country of what?
It's New
10
Jersey.
million total. It's New
Yeah,
Jersey.
it's the size of New Jersey.
It really
Yeah.
can't. So every single country was figuring out what to do. Israel said, well, we're not going to send them back to the countries they came from if they left. So they found a third party country that was willing to take them in and essentially give them citizenship. And that's what Students for Justice in Palestine used. So even though Israel's solution was more humane than every other country's, they just started an event that said, you know, Israel is a racist country that's rejecting African migrants and sending them to certain doom, which was the exact opposite of what was happening. And it's something that was happening across every single country. Like I
But
remember
of course,
reading
when
the
Israel's
headlines.
doing something,
Of course.
you have to highlight
So
the wrong. Yeah.
it all kicked off when, you know, at this event, a bunch of Jewish students, myself included, went and started raising our hands and asking questions saying, well, how's France dealing with this? How's the UK dealing with this? How's Turkey dealing with this? And they didn't have the answers. And I said, well, then this seems like a really, you know, uninformed event to be having with the Black Student Union. And they just, that's the thing. Students for Justice in Palestine had partnered with all of the unions. The way that they work is in the fall, it's their dormant semester, and all they do is they build coalitions. If you're on the board of SJP, and let's say they're a 10-person board, your only job in the fall is to join a club, get on the board, and become friends with the president and vice president. That's your only job. That's it. But suddenly, the spring semester, the active semester, that's when everything goes into action. That's Israel Apartheid Week. That's when they launch their resolutions. That's when everything that they set in motion in the fall actually comes to be. So in the fall, they had already built those relationships. In the spring, they had that event with the Black Student Union and the Latino Student Union co-hosted. And that's kind of when everything broke loose.
I'm surprised that the Latino
Yeah.
student union was involved in this.
Actually, the Latino Student Union kicked me out because they were voting to adopt BDS. And I raised my hand and I said, I just don't think that this is our place as Latinos. You know, Israel and Latin America have a lot of different ties when it comes to innovation, technology. This isn't really something we should be voting on like this without actually considering it. And they sat down, they said, Adela, really, you? And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you don't really understand the Latino experience. And I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Juan, born in the U.S., first generation American. Maybe you have a different Latino experience than I do, but last I checked, when we enter this country, you go to a line that says U.S. citizens, I go to a line that says foreigners. When I graduate, I have to have a job lined up that sponsors me, or I have to go back to Mexico. How many times has it happened to me that I've become illegal for a certain period and I can't leave the country? My brother right now can't go to Mexico. He can't travel. He missed my cousin's weddings. Why? Because he's in a transitional period. He met his now wife because he had visa issues and had to move back to Mexico for 4 months until the visa came back to fruition. We have different immigrant experiences, but it became one of those things that if you didn't fit a specific narrative in the Latino Student Union, then you weren't Latino enough for them, which to me was insane because I was actually
Because
born
you are
in
more
Mexico.
Latina than them.
He didn't even speak Spanish. He's what we call a no sabo. A no sabo is someone who's Latino and doesn't speak Spanish.
Does that mean like you don't know?
I don't know,
Or I don't
but
know.
it's in really incorrect grammar. It's like no.
Okay.
You know, it's like that.
Right,
so
right.
a no
The
sabo.
irony. Yeah.
It's funny because he was a no sabo kid, which is fine. But don't tell me I'm not Mexican
Tell
enough.
me who I'm not. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that was definitely interesting. But yeah, it all started with BDS, and then suddenly it was one thing after the other. And I kept meeting with the school, and it got to the point that every single event we hosted was protested by Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace, which was a group of like 6 Jews that were
Anti-Zionist Jews. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
even Shabbat dinners, they'd come and protest, start reading from their phones. How disrespectful. But it escalated to Yom HaAtzmaut, where they assaulted and battered a Jewish girl. They burned an Israeli flag. They got arrested by NYPD. And I went back to the school and I said, what are you doing about this? And instead of doing anything, the school actually gave them an award. And
What was the award?
The President's Service Award for outstanding contributions to NYU life.
I'm in shock.
Yep. And that's when I decided to file my case.
As you should.
Yeah. Forget the fact that my Middle Eastern Studies professors told me to stop attending classes. No one would work with me, and I had to take my final exams in a separate room from everyone else. I didn't sue then. I sued when NYU gave an award, making it clear that they were celebrating anti-Semitic violence. I can't imagine any other group that can assault and batter a girl, burn a flag of a group, get arrested by NYPD, and then get an award for
And
it.
get celebrated.
Like, not even a fraternity. Imagine
No.
a fraternity burning
The American flag?
Yeah,
Or
or
burning any sort of country's
another
flag?
fraternity's flag.
Right,
Imagine
another
it's two
flag.
fraternities. One fraternity burns another fraternity's flag and assaults one of those fraternity's members and then gets arrested
they're
by
praised for
NYPD.
it. Mm-hmm.
Are you telling me that NYU would let that fraternity continue?
No.
No, it would be a national headline and it would say, these frat kids. But when it's anti-Semites, they're freedom fighters, fighting for justice.
It's just crazy because, being someone that was in New York for the last 6 years until moving to Miami more recently, post October 7th, we experienced rising levels of anti-Semitism more so than ever. But we also experienced the 2023, or not 2023, when was it? 2020?
Shake Shut Up.
2021, yes. There was, obviously some conflict. And I remember, my friends at the time who were not Jewish, there was a little bit of tension, but, I let it pass and, we were still friends. And October 7th was when really, things shifted between my friend group. But to think about 2018, 2019, that time that there was still so many things like this going on, that's a lot of the world was not purview to that, especially in New York. I would have never thought that was happening in 2028.
But you know what? I think I should have seen it coming. I think that one of the moments, the year before everything happened at NYU, they put a resolution on student government, the same coalition, to divest from private prisons. And the way the hearing went was, we must divest from private prisons. NYU is not invested in private prisons. Until we divest, we are perpetuating racial stereotypes that keep people of color downtrodden. NYU is not, nor has it ever been, invested in private prisons. NYU is perpetuating this. And I just kept sitting there being like, we're voting to divest from prisons we're not invested in? And I remember thinking, these are people who are driven ideologically, who aren't actually looking for solutions or facts or anything. And that was the first time that I found myself voting against the rest of student government, because I said, we don't need to pass this resolution because we're not invested in private prisons. So why are we passing this resolution? I just kept motioning to end the debate and table the I said, let's motion and either vote now or table the resolution because we're wasting time. Let's talk about commuter students who need Metro cards. Let's talk about food insecurity and how every club orders food on NYU's dime and the food goes to waste. Why don't we feed people who live in our same community who are having food insecurity issues? Let's create a point system. If you have leftover food and you drop it off at the student government office, we'll give you a credit for next semester, and that way we can distribute the food again. There were so many amazing ideas I had for student government, but none of that mattered because we had to divest from prisons we weren't invested in. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, it just doesn't. Why are you putting your eggs all in this one pot that has nothing to do with anything that the school's invested in?
So when I saw that happen, I said, this is ripe. This is ripe for an anti-Zionist takeover. And it happened. And I was shocked because they were my friends.
I was going to say, so tell me more about your friends, the first 2 years of college. Who were you surrounding yourself with?
Yeah, so I had my Jewish friends and they were cool. And I had my sorority friends and they were very cool. They were cool girls. And then I had my student government friends. And that was the senator for queer students. I was the senator for Latino students, a senator for international students, of which I was one as well, to make the visa process a little bit easier. They were really great people. And then there were a lot of people that were just they just meant really well. One of my really good friends on student government was a graduate student who I knew when he was an undergrad at NYU. He was in the frat. His name was Mike, and he was the treasurer of student government. And when the BDS resolution came up as treasurer, he was voting against it because he said NYU Tel Aviv gets our engineering students a lot of internships because it's a startup city. And, we don't want to shut that down. So he was voting as the treasurer of student government. And when that happened, the group chats started sending polls of how many times a week I had to sleep with him for him to be a Zionist. Meanwhile, I was waiting for marriage. I'm a traditional Syrian Jew. And it got so nasty that when people started sending him the screenshots of these polls, I was like, this is nasty. This is nasty, nasty people. And there were so many people that during the BDS votes, they would send me messages on Facebook being like, hey, I agree with you. I just, this is such a difficult situation. And people were afraid to abstain. Forget even vote against BDS. They were afraid to abstain because they knew they'd be socially ostracized.
But that's something I wanted to ask for your opinion, because I can only imagine. This was in 2018, right? Imagine being a college student today at NYU. I genuinely can't imagine. I can't imagine being a college student in general right now during these times, given how divided the world is. But as someone that, had these friends, and I the same, had friends of all different backgrounds, and I embraced diversity my entire life, the moment something happens to our community, like that shifts, and that I felt so shafted by people I once called sisters. But I think now what I'm struggling with personally is like, okay, now we're in this 2.5 years post October 7th. I feel like I've isolated myself a little bit with just the Jewish community. So how do you advocate for your people without removing yourself from others that should be and could be like allies to us, right?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Look, everyone reacts differently. I have one sister who was in Princeton on October 7th. My sisters are very different. One of them, October 7th at NYU, gets out an Israeli flag, calls me and says, "Do we have flags? I need flags," and starts singing Am Yisrael Chai in front of the protesters. She's my activist sister. She's great. She's great. My other sister, though, calls me and says, every single one of my friends is at the encampment, and they're all wearing keffiyehs to graduation. And she said, "I don't know what to do." And we were on our way to graduation to see her. And I asked her, I said, "Do you care about the friendships?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Do you care about the friendships?" I said, "Because if you don't care, go, understand it's going to be the last time you spend time with your friends. Enjoy your graduation. And when you step out of there, you know that you're never speaking to them again." I said, "But if you care about them, then you're going to have a conversation and it's not going to be comfortable." And I asked her, I'm like, "Who else can you sit with?" And she said, "Well, I have my friends from Birthright." I said, "Great. You're going to get a stole from them that has an Israeli flag on it, and you're going to sit with your friends." I said, don't give up your friendships because of this. If you care about them, you have a conversation and you show up as your full self. She said, "Can you handle mom?" I said, "I'll handle mom." So we show up and we see an ocean of keffiyehs, and then we see my sister in the middle. My mom's like, "What's she doing there?" And I said, "Believe me, this is a lot harder for her than it is for you. And this is more impactful than what my other sister was doing at NYU." Because she was actually going to have a meaningful conversation with them. Now, I don't know if she did in the end or didn't, but what's interesting is that when the kids walked out of graduation to go hug their parents, every single one of them took their kiffiyeh off. Every single one.
Yeah, they were just looking to make a statement.
Exactly.
When they were together. Yeah.
Exactly. And then as soon as they were with their families, they took it off. Actually, there was an African family behind us, and they were very angry because they said, "We didn't have, come to this country for our son to go to an Ivy League school to wear a flag that's not even ours."
Oh, so their son was wearing a keffiyeh.
Their son was wearing a keffiyeh too.
Wow.
It was interesting. When we were walking into the graduation, there was a group of random students, random Asian students, nothing to do with it, giving out flags saying "Free flag for a free Palestine, free flag for free Palestine." And you show up to Princeton graduation and everyone's waving Palestinian flags. What?
Yeah, at a graduation
very
in
weird.
the United States.
In New
at
Jersey.
a top Ivy League school.
So I think you're right. We have isolated ourselves, and I think it's because we've been so afraid to have those difficult conversations. I have a friend who's not necessarily pro-Israel. At NYU, she even told me, she's the one that said, like, "Hey, just letting you know there's a resolution to boycott your club." She said, "Look, I don't know about Israel-Palestine. I probably side with Palestinians, but..."
And can I ask you a question? Is she white? Is she...
She is originally from Kenya, and she grew up in Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's African background.
Okay.
Which she explained to me is very different from Black Americans. She doesn't consider herself a Black American. She is African American.
African American, yeah.
So she called me, and she's been my best, one of my best friends from freshman year. And she said, "Just letting you know, they're signing this boycott against your club. I don't know anything about this. I probably side with Palestinians, but I know that you don't stand for what they say you stand for. So my club is not going to sign." She became the only member of the Black and Brown Coalition, the only club not to sign on to that BDS resolution, which was insane. And then, as things progressed, 2021, October 7th, we kind of reached an understanding where she said, "Look, we're not going to see eye to eye." She said, "We're going to do one sit down where I'm going to ask you all the questions I have. I don't want you to go in conference mode, Adela, explaining, well, since 1948, I want you to just talk to me like a person. And then after we close that conversation, we close it, and to each their own." And I said, "Okay." And that's it. We
That's
did
very healthy,
that.
the way you handled that.
It was. And she's still one of my best
I was going
friends.
to say, do you still have a relationship with her?
Yeah,
Okay.
we talk on the phone. She lives in Atlanta now, and we talk on the phone like at least once a month.
Yeah. I think what's different too about that situation is that she has no real ties to the Middle East or to this conflict at all. And it's easier to have a conversation with someone like that. But it's also, I think it could be easier, but it could be more difficult to have a conversation with someone who's just like a white liberal girl from California that has zero
That's
stake
when I
in the
stopped
game.
speaking to my old
And
roommate.
those were my college friends. So except for, I did have two best friends who are Lebanese Muslim. So those conversations were extremely difficult. And we did have conversations, but yeah, it's very hard when like you have people like that have family in Lebanon still, and they've been impacted by the Lebanese-Israel war. So I think those are the types of things where like you may never see eye to eye on. And it's like we respect each other, but that friendship is no longer there, But that's really like heartbreaking. And so I really struggle with that of like, okay, I'm now so entrenched in the Jewish community, which is incredible. And I feel way more aligned with like who I am as a person at my core. But, I still like regret some of the friendships that I've let go because I've been afraid to like have those hard conversations.
Yeah, and it's always harder to have them than not.
Right. It's easy to just look away.
Yeah, but it's also okay to decide that a friendship is not worth saving. Like my freshman, no, she was my sophomore year roommate, sophomore or junior, I don't even remember. She started posting the most disgusting anti-Semitic things. I'd had issues with her in the past about other things, and it literally got to the point that I just like sent her a thumbs up, and that's it. Like I don't unfollow people, but I muted her. I said I have no reason to see anything she's posting. I really don't care. She texted me happy birthday this year. I saw it. If you're watching this, I saw it. I didn't answer, but I saw
But
it.
you saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm petty a little bit sometimes, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. If you don't care about the friendship, you don't care about the friendship, and that's also okay. You let the friendship go.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, I think it feels, of course, there's been terrible things that have happened to our community, but every time and time again, we come together, and what's so beautiful about our community. I mean, I was in Mexico City last weekend, as we know, and I was at a Shabbat dinner with like 40 people I'd never met in my life, but we can only do that because thousands of miles away, you're still at home when you have our people.
Which, by the way, is I always tell my friends that being Jewish is literally a superpower. So my friend, who's originally from Kenya, she decided to move to Austin to take a job. And she moved there and she said, my roommate's weird. My coworkers are old. Like, how do I make friends? Like, how do you make friends in a new city? And I said, well, what I would do is I would go to like a Chabad or to a synagogue. And if there's no young people, like they all know a young person and they would introduce me to people. And she's like, so you want me, a black woman, to walk into a church in Texas? And I was like, I guess not. Like it's interesting because really there's no equivalent. We have the strongest diaspora community where I can walk into a Chabad anywhere in the world and I can sit down and have a beautiful meal and have something in common with the people who are hosting me, who are happy to host me.
Yep. Thousands of miles away.
Thousands
in
of
a place
miles
you've
away.
never been.
Yeah.
Like it's the most incredible, special
really
feeling. What's your relationship with Israel? And what was it like growing up? Like, did you visit Israel at all? Like as a kid or?
We were your typical Syrian, Mexican, Jewish family that went to Israel for bar mitzvahs and vacations. So we went for my cousin's bar mitzvahs, for my brother's bar mitzvah. I'd say that we went maybe like once every 3-ish years. It wasn't very often. And then at one point, my grandpa got this like Zionist bug in him where he was like, whenever we travel around the world, we have to stop by Israel. So literally we'd be in like China, but we would have to stop in Israel before going back home. As if that makes sense, which it does not make sense.
It doesn't make sense flight-wise, right?
Yeah, so actually when Birthright, everyone was going on Birthright, I said, well, I've already been to Israel. I love Israel. It's a good place. Like, it's good, it's fine, but like I'm going to go for a free trip. But instead, on Birthright, that was the first time I was actually there without my family. And it was the first time I was there with friends and people my age and Israeli soldiers my age. And then I ended up extending and we went out with them. And it was the first time I really felt like it's not a place I go to on vacation. It's a place where I really can have a home and where I understand the people and the people understand me. And that's, I think, why everyone should go on Birthright, because it's a very different experience from I'm going with my mom and my dad and my siblings and we have a scheduled tour and we're going to the Shiloh pool and then we're walking on Masada. Like it's a very different experience because you actually feel the people and the reality of being on a trip. And then they bring the Israeli soldiers who are your age, they're 18, 19, and their reality is completely different from yours. You're on a college campus, they're fighting for their country. Yeah. That was like an insane shock to me. Now, for me, Israel, once I got into NYU, which was my dream, I wanted to go to Israel to the army. And I told my mom about it. And she started crying when she realized I was serious. I said, I just want to defer NYU. I did it. I got in. Let me defer and go because I felt a need to serve. I couldn't explain it another way. I said, I feel the need to serve. And my mom said, look, go to college 4 years. And if at the end of it, you still feel the need to serve, I'll drive you to the airport and you can
She's
go.
like, I know that's not going to happen. So like, sure, we'll wait 4 years. Yeah.
Well, instead I end up suing my school. My case makes it to the White House, at least in executive order. in Israel.
You did it in a different way.
Yeah,
You served in a
exactly.
different
I served in a
way.
different way. My mom literally
Exactly.
asked
Yeah.
me, like, after my graduation, she's like, still feel the need to serve? And I'm like, I think I've served
I've served
plenty.
enough. Yeah, the serving has been done.
Yeah.
No, that's incredible. We all have that bug at some point too. Like I had that same thing a year ago. I'm like, I work for an Israeli company. I'm over my friends. Everyone's an anti-Zionist. Everyone's against us. I'm moving to Israel, making Aliyah.
Need to serve.
And like you have that moment where you go through the motions of like, should I do it? Should I live here? Can I do it? And you realize that, at least this is what I realized. I love Israel. It's always going to be home, but I don't need to live there. And that is okay.
I love how you're talking about this because I am famously a non-Aliyah Zionist Jew. I didn't realize this until I literally got my wisdom teeth out and I was under. And as I'm coming back into consciousness, I start hysterical crying. And my mom's like, are you okay? And I said, I love Israel, but I don't want to live there. And my mom's like, what? And I'm like, I love it, but I just don't want to live there. And this is all on video. And my mom's like, that's okay. And that's a hard thing because I'm an Israel activist, right? That's my profession.
Yeah.
So everyone's questions to me in the Q&A is, all right, so when are you making Aliyah? And I would always make some excuse. I'd say, well, the fight's not done here. The fight's not done here. Until I said, it's okay that I don't want to live there. That's fine. If you want to move there because your heart so desires it, go ahead, do it. But if you're going there out of fear, or if you're going there for a reason that's external, then don't go. Don't go. And I love Israel, but I think that the diaspora community predated the modern state and postdated it. If you look at like Jewish history, for the last, 2,000 years, we've been a diaspora community. And with minus the last 100, and we've built really phenomenal roots in diaspora countries.
Yeah, we've thrived, and we need to continue to thrive and not run away from that. It's so easy though to be like, okay, we just need to go home. But realistically, Israel cannot support our entire population. Like there needs to be some of us in the diaspora making an impact. And I think that's what's so amazing about the work that you're doing and the work that like other leaders and voices in the community are doing. And I think going back to Birthright as well, I went on Birthright in 2018, like I graduated college and I was like, okay, I'm going, and had obviously the most incredible time. And you're so just like immersed in it when you're there, but then you leave, right? You're back to reality and like you kind of forget about it. You forget about like your purpose as a Jew. You just go back to assimilating into normal New York City hustle and bustle life. And then, something like October 7th happens and I had the opportunity to go on a trip called Storytellers. I don't know, have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
It's Birthright's newest initiative. So it's a program for creators to essentially establish our Jewish voices. So it's a trip led through Birthright. It's for creators like ages like 24 to 40. And I was on the first cohort this summer in August. Got a chance to go. We learned from like people that, were high up at Wiz, like influencer marketing, content creation, like things, just even people from the government to like better be able to shape our narrative in the online sphere or whatever sphere some of these creators influence. Maybe that's like artwork, for example, or just like acting, because obviously Hollywood too has experienced like a huge shift in the last year. So it's been amazing to go and experience something like that as a 29, 30-year-old versus, someone that had just graduated. Like, I think we see ourselves as, 21, 22-year-olds as so mature. And like, that's an age where you can really absorb a lot. But I think, it really doesn't make as much of an impact until you're a little bit older and more like secure in like your identity.
So actually, it's funny, after October 7th, it was Birthright alumni that went to Birthright and said, like, we need to go back, like, send us back. Like these were alums that were now in their 30s or 40s. And they said, well, can you send us to volunteer? And the Birthright volunteer program that now exists was started because Birthright Israel alums asked for it. And I think that to me was very telling. Because like you go on this trip and people really think it's like a fun 10 days in Israel, but it does create a connection that maybe unfortunate. It took something like October 7th to wake up. But once people woke up, they begged to go back for that connection. So I think you're right. And yeah, it's also funny, like, living in Israel, not living in Israel, you don't have to make that decision. Like I can go to Israel and spend the entire summer there and work from there. And, I don't have to pick up and move. And whenever people ask when I make Aliyah, I say tomorrow. And they say, what do you mean tomorrow? And I said, didn't you hear Mashiach is coming?
Yeah,
Mashiach is coming tomorrow. So when Mashiach comes, I go.
I will be there. Yes, you're like, I'm just waiting for that day, for tomorrow. Another tomorrow will happen. Yeah, there's always an opportunity. It's always, hopefully, Baruch Hashem, going to be there. But there's a lot of work that we can do here at home. And I want to end on like a positive note, but what gives you hope right now about, being Jewish, Israel, whatever that may be?
It gives me hope, honestly. I do a lot of public speaking, which I love. It's great. But one of every 5 times I speak to high school students and sometimes even middle school students. And those are the most amazing and interesting conversations that I've ever had. Like when they bring me in to speak to a group of middle or high schoolers, they say, yeah, speak for 45 minutes, 15-minute Q&A. And I'm like, no. I'll speak for maybe 30 minutes. I want at least a half hour for Q&A because these kids are worlds ahead of where we were. I want you to think back to your upbringing. We never had that moment. We never thought of activism. We never thought of Zionism. When did you learn the word Zionism?
A few years ago.
A few years ago.
As a probably 25-year-old,
Exactly.
which is absolutely insane.
Hey, it happens for me. I remember in college, someone said, would you say Realize Israel, the club I was president of, was a Zionist organization? I said, I don't know if I'd use the word Zionist. I'm thinking back and I'm like, that was very stupid, but it's because I didn't really know what it was. Yeah. Now, these kids after October 7th woke up and they're putting themselves in these programs like BBYO or NCSY or, Club Z, all of these new programs that are educating kids on their youth. And if it was an older program like a BBYO or an NCSY, they're adding an advocacy component to it or an identity component to it, which were conversations we were not having at their age. So now I sit down with these high school and middle school students and they're so much further ahead than where we were, which means that when they get to college, they've already thought about these things. And that gives me hope. Actually, one time I spoke at a middle school event and after a girl came up to me and she said, I think I have a case against my middle school. I said, what, Title VI? And she said, yes. And in my head, Title VI, we think of universities. And I was like, okay, that's not really usual.
Is that applicable to middle school?
It is applicable to middle schools. I was like, okay, walk me through it. And she walked me through her case. And I said, I think this is a strong case. And she filed one of the first Title VI against middle schools for antisemitism. Why? Because she heard me speak and got inspired. That's amazing.
Yeah, that gives me hope.
I would have never,
yeah.
I sued NYU at 22 and I was quaking in my boots. I don't want to say the other word because I know that,
Yeah.
shitting my pants.
Yeah. Shaking in the boots, shitting my pants.
I was shaking in my boots.
Yeah.
And I did it. And it was one of the scariest experiences of my life. And now I'm looking at this girl.
A 12-year-old, 13-year-old. Yeah.
She was a 14-year-old and she sued her school for anti-Semitism. That's amazing. So what gives me hope? That our people woke up and now they're starting movements. That gives me hope.
Yeah, at a younger age, because we didn't do that. Our generation didn't do that till yesterday.
We were sleeping at the wheel.
That makes me extremely hopeful because I think that's a major concern is like, what is the next generation going to look like? And what are these kids learning? Because I remember myself as a 12, 13-year-old, I didn't want to be in Hebrew school. I was over it. I didn't give a fuck.
I went to college with the goal of leaving the Jewish community.
Right. And you're like, quickly came right back.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that these kids are really like ingraining in their identity, the advocacy component, and they know who they are when they get to college. I think that's been
key difference.
The biggest difference.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm so glad you shared that. I think that'll be a great glimpse of hope for listeners to hear. So thank you so much, Adela, for being here.
My pleasure.
This is awesome. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.